Good people, I'm Dmitry. I think we can agree that webcams are still important in today's age, even though we're slowly returning to almost going back to work, but my gosh, conferences every day, video calls, I don't think I've seen myself that much on video, and I make videos for a living. Not surprisingly, there are new players entering the space like the Elgato FACECAM, which is a really expensive webcam, but how does it compare to everything else that is available on the market? So we decided to buy all the best-selling and best-rated webcams on Amazon to see how they stack up to each other. Some are great, some are trash, and some were really surprising too. So here are the 9 contenders: the Logitech BRIO, the Logitech C922 Pro, the Logitech C270, the Razer KIYO PRO, the Razer KIYO, JellyComb 1080p Full HD, Nexigo N930 AF, Nexigo N60, and of course, the Elgato FaceCam. In this visual experiment, we'll do an office setup and also gaming/streaming set to push these webcams to the limit when it comes to exposure and color and detail. We'll also do a blind test throughout the team to see who likes which camera the most. Of course, we'll leave timestamps for each webcam down below. So let's begin right after this. Play your games the right way with the much improved Virtuoso RGB Wireless XT with Bluetooth support, fantastic swivel hinges, deeper ear cushions, tactile controls with USB-C charging, a beefy microphone to step up your comms game, and awesome wireless sound reproduction. Check it out below. All right, so for this first test, let's begin with this office environment, right? So no additional lighting on me, just a big window right in front of me, give me non-direct light. This is the Logitech BRIO. The reason I'm recording this as the first camera is because it's the only one that is capable of 4K recording, so 4K 30 or 1080p 60. It's around $170. It records in 65, 78, and 90 degree field of view that you can change in the Logitech software. Autofocus is pretty decent. When you do go back, it might hunt a little bit, but one cool thing is that it has infrared sensors for Windows Hello unlocking. In terms of the microphones, it has dual stereo microphones with noise cancellation. This is what you're hearing now. And I feel like they sound actually very decent as well. I really like the physical characteristics. It's a low profile body. The mount is stable on the monitor. It has USB-C connection at the back with a removable cable. Now bumping down the resolution to 1080p and bumping up the FPS to 60 is great. You get a little bit of more fluid motion, but doesn't feel like true 60 FPS to me, which is unfortunate. It feels like 30 FPS that's been kind of interpolated and smoothed out instead of being true 60 FPS. But in terms of color, contrast, exposure, I feel like the BRIO does a really good job. And yeah, especially I'm wearing this blue shirt, so you can tell the difference in the blue between all the webcams. Plus, if you can see the detail and the texture of what I'm wearing and the plants and other things that are in the background. So this is the Logitech BRIO. Let's move on to something else. Moving on to the next webcam. Here we have the latest from Elgato, the Elgato FaceCam for $199. So this is the most expensive and the newest webcam in this roundup. And right off the bat, there's something weird happening with skin tones in terms of I look kind of pink and orange, not what I normally look like. But in terms of the rest of the color, it looks pretty decent in terms of white balance of the whites and the greens and everything like that. A few things to notice here. So first of all, this is the only webcam in here that does not have a microphone, which is why I'm recording everything onto the Elgato Wave 3. And so that's definitely a negative, but it's also a webcam that's targeted towards streamers where you will 100% have some form of external microphone solution. So it's one of those things where they even say who uses webcam microphones anyway. So this thing has a 24mm prime lens at f2.4 with a fixed focus. So anything between 30 and 100 centimeters would be totally tack sharp, as you can see. So the benefit of that is that there's no hunting for autofocus like we actually saw with the BRIO previous camera. And also the background is like naturally slightly blurry, which is nice. It's recording in 1080p 60, does not go any higher than that in terms of resolution and frame rate. It has an 82 degree field of view. As for the physical characteristics, it's a fairly chunky camera. It has a USB-C port at the back with a removable cable. It has a blue LED in the front to indicate when you are streaming. It has a 1/4 inch thread mount at the bottom to mount to tripods and other accessories, but the included mount for on top of the monitor is really trash. It's not stable at all. I feel like I don't even want to touch the desk in fear of the webcam just falling over. So that's unfortunate. So next up is whatever this thing. This is Nexigo N930 AF. Whew, AF indeed, right? So in terms of video quality, what happened? In terms of AF quality, So autofocus, you can see it's hunting. Even if I come closer a bit, it doesn't, there we go, it kind of finds me, and then it really likes my Lego in the background. But this thing is $55. It can only go up to 1080p 30 FPS. It has a 65-degree field of view, so slightly more narrow versus the one that we have just looked at before. But my gosh, what happened to the audio quality? You can hear it has a built-in microphone. I would have been totally fine if they actually removed the microphone, dropped the price a bit, because the microphone quality is 100% downgrade here. The cable is non-removable, and the physical characteristics remind me a lot of the Logitech 900 series of webcams. Plus we have the two blue LEDs to indicate when you are recording. For this next webcam, this is the JellyComb FHD web camera that is no longer available, which is weird because it basically kind of disappeared from the face of the planet. But when I bought it, it was $25, and now you can find them slightly rebranded in like certain Amazon stores under a different brand. But here, for $25 in terms of actual color and quality, it reminds me a little bit of what my skin looks like with the Elgato FACECAM, so kind of orangey and pinky. But in terms of the whites and contrast and saturation, I feel like it's pretty decent for $25. It is a 1080p at 30 FPS webcam. It has a privacy lock for video. It has stereo dual microphones, which is what you listen to now, which sound pretty terrible because it picks up that weird autofocus noise, which is so bizarre for you to hear that on the webcam, right? All right, so let's try some Logitech webcams. This is the Logitech C922 Pro Stream. In terms of color and exposure, I feel like I'm a bit too underexposed. In terms of color, it's totally fine. Like there's no weirdness happening. Perhaps I'm a little bit too on the cooler side for auto white balance, which this has built in. This is a $79 webcam, so maybe a little bit too pricey for what this looks like. It includes 1080p at 30 FPS or 720p at 60 FPS. It has a 78-degree field of view, so not too wide angle, but it does kind of compress you into the frame, which is nice. In terms of microphone, this is what you can expect. And autofocus, I mean, it doesn't seem to be here, which is kind of weird because it should have autofocus. Like if I'm arm length distance away from it, I am totally fine in terms of focus, but it likes to keep my shelf nice, tack sharp versus me. I really like the physical characteristics of this webcam. It's low profile, the white LEDs to know when the webcam is enabled, which is nice. And the webcam is pretty lightweight, so the mount that goes on top of the monitor is perfectly stable. This is what 720p at 60 frames per second looks like. It is smoother, but it also feels like there's some interpolation happening and it's not true 60 FPS. And also we lose a lot of quality in detail, so stick to 1080p for this one. This is the other Logitech webcam, the C270 at only $29. But when I say only, this is only the quality you can expect. So it's only 720p at 30 frames per second, nothing higher in terms of resolution. The field of view is 60 degrees, so it's very tight in your face. This is what the microphone sounds like, by the way. It is built into there, so at least this $29 webcam has a microphone, like the FaceCam doesn't. But this thing has no autofocus, no software control. So what you get in terms of color and exposure, at least it's not like horrendous, you know, not overexposed. And in terms of color, it doesn't seem to be like totally out of whack. Okay, so for this next webcam, it's pretty impressive because it's about the same price as the previous Logitech C270. This one is at $34. This is Nexigo N60. So it has a slight bump in resolution at 1080p at 30 FPS. So that's pretty good in terms of color and quality and exposure. I feel like everything is very decent. My shirt pops, my skin doesn't look weird, the white everywhere looks totally fine. So the only thing is you get that bow tie effect. We have a 110-degree field of view. There is a privacy cover. We also have the dual LEDs at the front to indicate that the camera is on and it's recording, and it has also built-in noise canceling microphone. So let me know what you think about the quality of the microphone. And the only thing is that it's supposed to have autofocus, I think, but it just keeps me in focus. It almost has this fixed focus like we have with the FaceCam. And for $34, this thing is really impressive. All right, so it's time to move on to some Razer stuff, right? So this is the Razer KIYO, around $83. It records at 1080p at 30 FPS or 720p at 60 FPS. The really interesting thing about this design, as you can see in the mirror, is that built-in ring light at 5600 Kelvin, so it's daylight balanced, and you can adjust the brightness of it by rotating this ring on the webcam itself. So you don't need to go in the software, which is pretty awesome. In terms of exposure and color and contrast, however, so the contrast seems to be okay, but exposure, what is happening? I'm very overly saturated, but that seems to be only the red channel. Like, it doesn't look very good. The advanced autofocus, it's constantly hunting. Even if I come, it's like takes a while for me to find the face. Once it does, it kind of locks in place. But if you have any movement whatsoever, then it's a constant battle with that autofocus. The mount with this one is not very stable on top of the monitor, so I don't really want to touch it. And the fact that you can interact with that ring, man, that could be a falling hazard for the webcam. This is what 720p at 60 FPS looks like. It's very fluid, but you can see that hunting of the autofocus is a lot more aggressive and noticeable for some reason. And by the way, this thing has a built-in microphone with what you listen to now. So let me know what you think about the audio quality. All right, so the last webcam we have here is the Razer KIYO PRO. So this is also on the expensive side at $190, making it one of the most expensive ones in this roundup. But the cool thing is that it has 1080p 60 FPS uncompressed video. So that's kind of cool, where you can, work out the white balance without totally destroying the video feed. It has HDR enabled. It has this wide field of view angle with 2 more medium and narrow field of views included, with an f2.0 aperture, which we'll test in a little bit in a low light gaming streaming scenario. One of the biggest differences here versus the previous KIYO is the much improved autofocus. Like, it still hunts a little bit, but not as aggressive, like constantly trying to find you with this massive hunting. And also no more ring light on the webcam. So now it's still fairly chunky, but no more ring light, and they are trying to compensate with a larger sensor on here to have better low light performance without needing to add more light into the scene. The privacy cover here is absolutely massive, but of course it does not block audio. And this is what you're listening to now, that recorded by the Razer KIYO PRO microphones. And I think it is a really good quality microphone, so well done there. In terms of exposure and contrast and color, I feel like it's also one of the top ones in here in terms of giving me proper skin tones, not overexposing the background, giving me nice detail in the shirt. But this is 1080p 60 for $190, so still fairly expensive for what it is. Now, we also want to do a fun team blind test experiment to see which webcam looked best to their eyes. Let's hear what they think.
Wow, camera 1 is impressive. I really like the quality. Microphone sounds great. I mean, having used a lot of laptops, this is a much better upgrade. Okay, no. It's so bad. What's going on with the exposure? And one thing I noticed is that there's a lot of motion jitteriness with the image. I wouldn't say it's good, definitely. Okay, that audio sounds bad. It's like, what's that background noise? Yeah, that's true. It loves the wall. I don't think he's in focus. Everything's blue. It seems like the white balance just shifted all the way to like the 6000s. This looks like somebody just applied like a Fuji LUT on it, which I kind of like. Pretty good exposure. Overall, I feel like camera 1 just takes the edge. Like, the quality on that is just incredible. I wonder what that is. My pick, camera 1, the best. But I also want to know what it is.
Actually, everybody had the exact same pick for the #1 webcam, and that was number 2. I have no idea what webcam that is, but number 2 was the winner, but not by a long shot. Number 1 came in a very close second. But the third pick that we all had was probably something a little bit interesting, and we actually picked number 7. Now, number 7, it almost got up there a little bit higher simply because of the fact that it was such a big surprise. Its autofocus was really good. Its color reproduction was pretty good. The only thing that sort of killed it was that fisheye effect on the lens that a lot of us picked up. And also, according to my notes here, the audio sounded terrible. Anyways, back to you, Dimitri.
All right, so for this next test, let's do a gaming/streaming set, mimicking some RGB lighting in the background, some harsh sources illuminating the subject. And for all the webcams where available, I am controlling the exposure, the white balance, the contrast, and all that stuff to give me the best possible image. And that's exactly what you're looking at right now with the Logitech BRIO. This looks like a fantastic image in terms of vibrancy in the background. There's no weirdly overexposed elements. And even though I have this really harsh source of light on my left, like in terms of facial exposure, everything looks excellent. Let's go to the next cam. Next up is the Elgato FACECAM. And so here, this is where you really need to tinker around with the camera hub to monitor your exposure. And it's good that you can actually set the shutter speed as well, because I'm recording in 1080p 60 right now. And this is the only one where the 1080p 60 footage looks properly smooth, because the shutter speed is double the frame rate, unlike with many others where the shutter speed is the same as the frame rate. The white balance is also absolutely crucial to be set manually, because otherwise it really throws it off. And noise reduction, so with noise reduction disabled, you get a much sharper image. And even though it is grainier, like if you can really zoom in, actually I'm gonna do that for you right now with the FOV, you can check out just how much grain there is. And my ISO is only at 375 and there's plenty of light going on. So that zoom FOV that you just saw, unfortunately, you can only do this. You cannot actually maneuver that zoom on screen, which is kind of stupid. And this is what happens when we turn the noise reduction on. Everything gets soft. I don't like it. So disabling it gives me a sharper image, and you can definitely tell that the dynamic range on this camera is worse versus the Logitech BRIO. So let's see what the rest holds up, shall we? Okay, so next up is the Nexigo N930 AF. I had to disable the AF so it stops hunting. So at least we have proper focus. In terms of the exposure, I had to really lower the brightness in order to get my face properly exposed. But in doing so, you remove any sort of information from the shadow. So of course the sensor is not very good in terms of detail as well. Yikes. Okay, so next up is the $25 JellyComb that you can find rebranded through other things. But in terms of brightness and exposure and contrast and white balance, everything seems to be very much in shape. I have locked down my white balance and autofocus so it doesn't hunt and doesn't change color based on this RGB glow, but very nice. Moving on to the Logitech C922 Pro, when you have control of your white balance and your autofocus, it seems to hold up pretty well. There isn't too much noise happening in my shirt, yet you can still have some definition in there. It's not too contrasty, and the color on my face is very well done. In a controlled environment, this is a capable camera. The same can also almost be said for the Logitech C270. When you lock down the white balance and play around with the exposure settings in the Logitech software, you have beautiful color that doesn't look unnatural, and even the background you can see, but mainly is the skin that looks good despite not having enough dynamic range to control for this very bright thing on my left side. But other than that, not bad at all. However, when we move on to the Nexigo N60, which is about the same price as the C270, you get higher resolution. But here's where you're starting to see a little bit of that sensor falling apart. I mean, in terms of color, as long as you lock down the white balance, everything seems to be working just fine. I'm not seeing any crazy artifacting happening with the colored wall. In terms of exposure on my left side, it seems to be well controlled as well. The only thing is that there's a bit more noise in my shirt. But other than that, this is a really good contender for around $30. All right, so for this next camera, this is a really interesting example where the Razer KIYO is actually so much better in this like gaming scenario. And I'm blasting myself with that ring light at 100%. And you notice that there's a big difference in terms of how I look now versus when we were recording previously without any lighting whatsoever. So I feel like this complements this gaming setup very well. The lights in the background are awesome. There's really good contrast and really good detail in comparison to what you just saw previously. And that to me is a big positive. So I'm really excited to see what the Razer KIYO Pro looks like next. And so finally, this is the KIYO Pro. My gosh, though, I'm so happy that ring light is not shining at me anymore, because that over long term will cause some eye damage. It's very bright otherwise. But the KIYO Pro, man, look at this quality. Everything's beautiful. There's very little noise, or it's not like jumping noise like we saw with the FACECAM from Elgato. All the color is good. The only negative is the bow tie effect, especially with any vertical lines. But in terms of color and exposure and detail, it's very good. I had to lock down the white balance and focus so it doesn't breathe and doesn't flick around when trying to correct for the RGB goodness. But in terms of everything looking very good in this gaming streaming scenario. I like it with the Razer KIYO PRO. Okay, so this has been a pretty lengthy one, but a few webcams really stand out in terms of both exposure, dynamic range, contrast, and detail. So the Logitech BRIO is my #1 recommendation. It's the only 4K camera, and even at 1080p, it still has the best dynamic range. It has almost that HDR look where the brights are not super contrasty versus everything else that has that really stark contrast between blacks and whites. For my #2 place, the Razer KIYO PRO and the Elgato FACECAM. Elgato FACECAM is a bit of a weird one because it has a large sensor, but it's got so much grain by default, even in like a good lighting condition, versus the Razer KIYO PRO. It has almost the same amount of detail, but without the grain. But the only disadvantage is the bow tie effect when you're using the wider field of view. All of these webcams, unfortunately, are really expensive, over $190, and that is when the $34 Nexigo N60 comes into play, because not only does it perform very well in both the office and your gaming streaming environment, it has a bit of a bow tie effect, but in terms of color, exposure, and contrast, everything is really well done, and it doesn't hunt for autofocus, which is something that you don't never have to worry about. So let me know which webcam looked best to your eyes. I'll leave links to everything down below. Thank you very much for watching if you're still here. I'll talk to you in the next video.